I think being a psychic, for me, um, I'm wired, and I think most of the good psych. I think this. I don't know that many, but most of the good psychics, I think, would be wired differently in that my first response is, "What can I do?" rather than "What can I get?" That's my first reaction. Now that can go really badly over time. For me, because when I'm tuned into somebody, I have no care about a tangible or material thing, so I can give away, the store.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. This is Bob Nickman. So glad you're here. My guest today is psychic Robert Lindsy Milne. More about that in a second. First, I'd like to invite you to check out my website, theexplodinghuman.com. You can see photos of my guests there, read the synopses, listen to the episodes, little bio on myself, and of course there is a donate button which will take you to Patreon. And I have some extra content there. If you'd like to become a supporter of the show, there will be extra content just for you. So check that out. Also, I have a YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Add the with Bob Nickman, and you can listen to episodes there. And there's also a Facebook page. I'm all over the place. So check it out. My guest today, as I said, is Robert Lindsy Milne. He is a psychic. He's been a working psychic since he was 15 years old. And he talks to me about when he first knew he had these abilities for intuition and knowing certain things that other people didn't, how he discovered that, some of his early childhood experiences, and the 50 years he's been doing work as a psychic. And he was involved in a scientific medical miracle, as far as I'm concerned. Well, he worked with a woman who was an epidemiologist whose husband was near death. And through her work as an epidemiologist and his work in connecting with her husband, who was unconscious for 8 months, in a coma for 8 months, and how they worked together, science and psychic, to heal this gentleman from a very rare disease. Really fascinating story, and there was a book written about it, which Robert's going to talk to me about. So if you're interested in all things psychic, you will enjoy this episode with Robert Lindsy Milne. You started at 15 years old, you told me.
Well, that's when I started doing readings, and I got paid for. I was homeless at that time in my life, and I heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room, it was in Toronto. I'm from Toronto and live in Toronto now. If you worked at the Cozy Tea Room and you worked there in the afternoon doing tea leaf readings and card readings, you would get a sandwich, a cup of tea, some cookies, and you would get paid at the end of the shift. And if you worked the night shift, you would get a hot meal, cookies, tea, and paid at the end of the night as well. And it'll be on the 17th of January, 56 years ago. I applied at the Cozy Tea Room, and I did a reading for the owner, and she hired me. And that day I started my professional career. And I worked at the Cozy Tea Room up until I was about 21. And in that time period, I worked 5-6 days a week, sometimes 7. And by the time I was about 21, I had done thousands of readings.
When you say that you were homeless at 15, what were the circumstances prior to that that you became homeless you don't even think of homelessness in Canada. I don't. I think of Canada as being taking care of their populace and it's not that crowded and there's all kinds of safety nets. That's what I think of Canada. So,
Well, we do indeed have that. And back in those days, and we're talking about mid 60s. So in those days, there weren't quite the amount of safety nets. And the other thing is that I wouldn't have taken it.
okay.
I wouldn't have taken that kind of help. Even though I was homeless, I wouldn't allow anyone to look after me. I looked after me. The reason I was homeless is because the home that I was born into and where I ran away from, my mother and father, it was an extraordinarily abusive, physically, emotionally. It was better for me to be on the streets. And by the way, I was on the streets in the wintertime at 15.
Man.
And now that may sound tragic, and in some ways it perhaps is. But it was then during that time in my life where I used my intuition, my psychic ability to survive. And every situation that I was in that time period, anytime that I was in danger or in trouble or hungry or whatever, I was always presented with the opportunity to use my intuition, my psychic skills, or an immoral or an illegal act. And most of the time, I chose the intuitive psychic way. There was no right or wrong way or right or wrong decision, but the decisions that I made had determined what direction my life would go in. And each one of those, at the time I didn't realize it, but each one of those was to a degree a test. Which way is this kid going to go? And almost always I chose the intuitive psychic way. Now, I just didn't wake up in an alleyway in a snowdrift one December morning and say, "Oh, I can see I'm a psychic." That's not quite what happened. From my earliest days that I can remember, I sensed and felt things for people.
Do you think that for lack of a better word, the harshness of your childhood was a catalyst to bring the psychic abilities out as a survival tool, or was just this something that was kind of sitting there, a part of you, and and you started cultivating it without even knowing what it was? You just probably assumed other people could do what you did anyway.
Well, actually, as long as I have a remembrance or an awareness, I've always sensed and felt energy things around people. And it was very normal. One of the strongest remembrances that had a big influence on me. One day I'd just come home from school for lunch. Now it was either kindergarten, grade, I was about 5, or grade 1, I was about 6. And I said to my mother, "Grandma Harris died today." Now, Grandma Harris, the woman that I was referring to, actually was my great-grandmother, who lived in London, England. I lived in Toronto, and we're talking about 1954, 1955. So news traveled very slowly in those days. And so I said to my mother, "Grandma Harris," and I'd only met her once in my life. Hardly ever, and I don't ever remember even talking about her after that. So I say to my mother, "Grandma Harris died today." My mother gets all upset, freaks out, yells at me, scolds me, and perhaps even hit me. More than likely she did, for just me saying, God said these bad things.
Sure.
The next night at dinner, my mother said to my dad, "Grandma Harris died yesterday." I thought my dad was going to get angry with my mother and yell at her for saying bad things. And to my astonishment, they talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't get angry. it stunned me. I didn't know why, because I had just said it the day before and got punished. So I would say things, get into trouble, and not know why. Those kind of things happen to me. And even as a child in public school, which by the way, I completed grade 8. I'm a grade 8 graduate. Even in school, I would go to I would see a teacher having a difficulty, and I'd go over and say something to the teacher. And inevitably, a couple of days later, the person, the teacher would say, well, what was that you were saying to me the other day? And I'd kind of remember it. And they just sort of, and also that happened with people, my friends around me.
So some people, like for the were responsive to it and open to hearing it and curious about what was going on, and then other people, like that story about your mom, she never said anything that you had said it to her prior to her knowledge of it.
Never
She said anything to your dad. She just shut it off.
Nor my dad. My dad's alive. He's 92. I see my father every week now. Haven't been seeing him in person for the last little while because of the pandemic. But we talk on Zoom. And I've come to terms with what went on in my early life, both with my mother, my father, as well as my siblings. My father this has been my career. And I've been accomplished. My father, for many, many years, had said to me that he would go to his grave believing his only son was a fraud and a charlatan. And he also has said to me numerous times, you're the only guy I've ever met that's never had a job. And now that really used to really piss me off. Just jumping forward, several 5-6 years ago, my dad and I were having brunch, and he was talking about his disappointment with one of his children, and I looked at him, and I said to him, "What do you think it was that caused your first 2 children to turn out so poorly?" And again, I was speaking to him from the point of view that I was seeing it from his perspective.
Mm-hmm. That's a hard question to answer.
And he looked up at me and he said, "You turned out pretty good." And then I said, "But I've never had a job." And he got very quiet for a moment, and he looked me in the eyes and he spoke very softly. And he said, "Some men need to have a job and some men don't. And you were one of those that didn't need a job." Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay, now that's the best it's ever going to be. So that was a profound experience for me just 5-6 years ago. Another one, again with my father, and this is when the reality set in how I was different than others and what I was going to do with my life. And my father took me to a Stanley Cup hockey game. We up here play that game,
Oh yes, I know. There's hockey clubs in every city's got the hockey clubs.
This would be about 1958 or 57, and we're at Maple Leaf Gardens. Boston and Toronto are playing in the semifinals. The series was tied 1-1, and they were playing the first game in Toronto. Of the series, and at the end of the third period, the score was tied 1-1, and the game went into overtime. And so the teams went off the ice and they cleaned the ice. And when the teams came back on the ice for the first overtime period, as they were just kind of stretching, I became immediately drawn to number 17 with Toronto Maple Leafs, and the guy's name was Gary Eman, number 17. And I knew he was going to score, just like I knew it. And it was so real to me that it had happened. And I was getting really excited. And then it was time for, the teams went to the bench and, get ready to start the period. And here in Maple Leaf Gardens, there's like 18,000 people in the building, and they're just about to drop the puck. And by the way, Eamon wasn't even on the ice. And just as they're about to drop the puck, the whole building, they turn the lights down, everything's silent except for the lights on. And I jump up and start yelling and screaming and cheering because I know Gary Eamon has scored. And the whole building just turned around and looked at me and my dad. and my dad just put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Sit down." And I did. And then the referee brought the puck and the game started. And I looked around and I realized then that nobody knew Eamon had scored or is going to score. Not even Eamon. And I wasn't really much watching the game. I was kind of stunned. And anyway, I don't know, 3-4 minutes later, Eamon jumps over the boards and a guy named Red Kelly passes the puck to him and Eamon tips it in the net. Boom. And the entire arena, Maple Leaf Gardens, erupts in cheering, yelling, lights going off and on, photography. And I'm sitting back looking around and I realized other people don't see what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was 9 years old. And that's when I knew I was different. And all of a sudden I realized why I was getting into trouble. And I also knew then, I didn't know how, but I knew then this is what my life was going to be and what I was going to do.
It seems like there would be a number of years where you had to protect yourself and be careful about the use or talking about this ability, seeing that you, one, got in trouble and two, that people didn't understand it. That must have been part of your feeling, like when like between that age and when you started to read tea leaves, I would think that you had to be careful.
Yeah, I got hit a lot. In those days, my baby sister and I, my sister Gail, right? I was always aware when we were going to get into trouble. I could feel the energy coming, and often it would be my mother, and my instincts would cause me to step in front of Gail. And often I would protect her. So the first person, that my mother would get to would be the one that would take the brunt of whatever she was going through at that time. So my instincts at that time were also one for protection. And when I realized what I was doing and what I could do, I became much safer.
It's interesting that you said it was 9 years old that happened. I had a not a psychic experience, but I was able to at that age read information at school, and then when I took a test, I could close my eyes and I could see the page.
Wow.
And I remember telling this kid, he goes, "How do you get such good grades?" And I said, "Well, I just close my eyes during the test and I reread the page. Why don't you do that?" He goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Can't you do that?" He goes, "No." I go, "I thought everyone could do that. They just didn't know that was a technique." Now, of course, that went away. It wasn't cultivated or recognized, and it just sort of faded away with some time. But I remember thinking, wow, so I get that feeling of I can do something other people can't do.
Bob, you can get back in touch with that. That's in your brain. It's still there. You can do that.
I've thought about that a few times.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of that, visual recall of things, but not much, not like I used to. How do you do that?
Practice.
Yeah.
Practice. Just practice. Do it. Visualize it.
Mm-hmm.
It's there.
I've thought of it a few times over the years. I remember the guy's name that I was talking to and the look on his face. I remember the moment.
Yeah, you and Sheldon Cooper, you both have photogenic memories,
Well, so I've always been drawn to people that have abilities that, whatever normal means, normal people, the average person doesn't seem to have or have cultivated. Because I could do that, I thought, oh, well, there is something else besides what's on the surface.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when you say tune in, and I know there's not probably proper words to explain it, but do the best you can. What does that feel like? What happens when you say you're tuning in? Are you visually seeing things? It is some, or is it an energy feeling inside your body? Is it a connection to the other person's energy field? I mean, how would you describe the way you experience that connection?
It's a glorious experience. When I'm deliberately with conscious awareness tuning in, doing a reading, it's when I am at my best as a living being. It's absolutely glorious to experience that. And I wished I could be like that all the time. And when I'm in that mode, the person in front of me, I love them. I feel deep love for the person. I see things that I would not normally see. Have you ever watched? Did you ever watch the original Star Trek? Did you ever do that?
Yes.
There was one episode where McCoy and they were on some desert planet or something, or desolate planet, but there would be these advanced beings that had lived there before, and somebody's brain needed to be transplanted or something, and this place had all these little cubes you put on your head, and you turned into like this mental giant. And McCoy put this on his head, and one of these two, and I remember the expression. He just puts it on. He goes, "Oh yes, of course, that's how it's done." And then he does this incredible brain transplant or something, right? And then they take the thing off his head, and now he's back to normal. That's what it's like when I'm tuning in.
I do remember that episode too.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Now that's what it feels like.
One of the first words you used was love. And I was wondering if that was actually thinking in the back of my mind, like that must be a part of it, because if you're actually going to connect to somebody at that level, there's got to be that, or it won't work. Or, you know what I'm saying? It's just, it's empathy. There's an empathic piece to it that has to be that.
For me personally, yes.
Yeah.
I can't say what other people do, and their motivation. Now, when I'm in that mode, when I connect with somebody, and the love I have for them is not a physical love. It's
right.
It's a deep accepting, and caring for that individual. And I have met some pretty scuzzy people.
That was going to be my next area. Like, okay, what happens when you tune into somebody who's really messed up and maybe even evil?
Yes. If I can trigger those feelings of love, and sometimes I can, I can be very kind and gentle with those people and feel love. My life is a life of service. I think being a psychic, for me, I'm wired, and I think most of the good psychics, I think this, I don't know that many, but most of the good psychics, I think, would be wired differently, in that my first response is, what can I do, rather than what can I get?
Mm-hmm.
That's my first reaction. Now that can go really badly over time, for me, because when I'm tuned into somebody, I have no care about a tangible or material thing, so I can give away, the store when I'm in that state. I need to be watched over, because in that mode, material things really mean very little to me.
So you have to be judicious about how you use the ability.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I have to be careful that I take care of myself.
Mm-hmm. I was watching I forget what show it was, and there was a guy that had been injured, and he was in a coma, and he had seen where this missing child was, but he couldn't speak, and so they brought in a psychic. And this wasn't a dramatic show. This was a documentary of someone, and the person connected and to this man in a coma, and was given the information about the location of this missing child, and they found the kid.
Wow.
And I was like, damn.
How did that happen?
Well, that's, it's kind of like when Mr. Spock would do the mind meld, and
Sure.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I have a documented real life experience with connecting with somebody in a coma.
Please tell me.
And by the way, I was mentioned in a book called The Perfect Predator, that I was part of a team that helped save this man's life. I have a long-term client. I can tell you her name because she wrote the book. Her name is Stephanie Strathdy, Dr. Stephanie Strathdy, and Stephanie is an epidemiologist at a Southern California university. She's a professor of epidemiology as well as associate dean. She's well known around the world as a HIV/AIDS researcher.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband, Tom, is a PhD. He has a PhD in experimental psychology. He also is a professor at the same university, and he's also associate dean of psychology. Stephanie and Tom go away on this beautiful vacation. Tom gets sick in Egypt. And by the way, the year before, I had done a reading for Tom and told him that he had some problems going on in his abdomen and it was going to get really serious. I furthermore told him that in the next while, he was going to get very sick, so sick that he would be closer to death than he could possibly be without dying. So he would survive the illness and he would lose 100 pounds because Tom had blown up a lot in weight. So a year or so later, they're away on their vacation in Egypt. Tom comes down with some type of upset stomach, gets really, really sick, gets rushed to the hospital in Egypt, and then catches the most powerful superbug known on the planet. And it's 100% antibiotic resistant, which basically means when you get that superbug, you die. Tom got medevac to Germany to a special clinic. This is in the book. By the way, the name of the book is called The Perfect Predator. So anyway, he gets medevac there. Stephanie's there. She called me on Skype. And the very first thing I said to her is, "What took you so long?" And then we started. And I made a psychic mental connection with Tom. And I knew what was going on with him 24/7. And I lived it day in and day out. And I knew, well, I didn't know the numbers of his vital signs. I didn't know what the vital signs were, but I knew when things changed in him. And I was often ahead of the doctors and even often ahead of the test, sometimes a day or two. Stephanie was told that her husband was going to die. And I said, I don't think that Tom is going to die. I think Tom is going to live. And the reason that I almost always knew he was going to live is because I visualized Tom's life force as like a candle. And when the flame was strong, regardless of what he was going through, I knew he was still, it's like somebody that's drowning in the water. When they're struggling, they're not drowning, right? It's when they stop struggling is when they're serious. So it was like the flame. So once the flame, as long as the flame was strong, whatever he was going through, I knew he was okay. When the flame flickered, I knew there were some issues. What I had told Stephanie, I noticed that candle flame was flickering and it looked like it was going to go out. And Tom was in isolation. Everyone around him was wearing hazmat suits. He hadn't been physically touched. He was unconscious. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know what was happening to him. It was dark. He was cold and he was letting go. And I told Stephanie that Tom needed to see his children. I said, yesterday would have been a good day. Today is a good day. Tomorrow's not so good. And if you wait longer than that, don't bother. That night, his two daughters, that day, they flew over to Germany, and they put on their hazmat suits and went in, and went in and saw their father. And while I didn't know exactly what was going on, I knew by the change in Tom's energy that something, the kids were there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Tom, Stephanie, and I were on another show together a little while ago. This happened in 2016, and we actually talked about my role. So I was like that with Tom. Stephanie compiled a group of people, scientists from around the world. And Stephanie sat out, and I told her she could do it. And that's also in the book. She decided that she could sit around and watch her husband die, or she could do something about it. And I informed her also. So what I'm talking about is what my part in the book. And I told her that she had experienced every type of problem or difficulty related to her job that she will ever experience, and won't meet any new kinds, just simply variations of what she's already experienced. And she has already experienced how to solve and find a cure. And she decided that she was going to find a cure. Tom was in a coma for 8 months. There were 3 different times in my work with Tom. Had I not been doing the job, Tom would have died, because there was nobody around to know what he was doing and how he was struggling. When Tom was conscious, and afterwards, it took him a while, a couple of years, he remembers the things that I spoke about. And it's journaled in the book, how I was understanding what he was experiencing, and how he was letting go. The big thing for Tom was when somebody's in a coma, they can hear. And there's never been for him the actual proof, and he got it. So this was a collaboration of scientists around the world that got together. So Stephanie and I had a meeting with Stephanie every day, telling her what was happening. Stephanie then said that she had narrowed it down to 3 possibilities of treatment. And she said, I just want to run them by you. She told me the first one, and I said, that's the one. And she said, yeah, but let me tell you about the other 2. And I just said, that's the one, Stephanie. And she said, let me tell you about the other 2. And I said, okay. And she told me, and I said, the first one. And it was that way. And she said, why? Oh, by the way, what she had found was something called phages. Phages. And she said, why is that the one? And I said, because it's like little Pac-Man. And they will go after the virus and eat it and kill it, or kill it and eat it. Mm-hmm. And she made her decision with all the science background, et cetera. She made her decision then by me saying it was Pac-Man's, because that's exactly what it looks like. That's exactly what happens. And do you know what phages are?
I have no idea. I was going to ask that.
Well, hang on to your chair. Phages are harvested from sewer water, and phages are excrement. Literally shit. In the 1920s and 30s, Russia were doing experiments on people that had intestinal and bowel type problems. And the way they treated people was they would inject raw stool into the person. I assume rectally. I've never been involved in that, but I assume that's how they do it. Anyway, the theory is that the good, healthy bacteria eats and kills the unhealthy bacteria. And they were having some success. And then they invented penicillin. So then you had a choice, a turd or a pill. Well,
Yeah.
So the research stops. But since all the super viruses have come back, scientists around the world have been doing experiments, and several countries and organizations have already been doing phage therapy. Tom was the first human to be injected with phages. And he was so sick, and he was hours from dying. And the doctors didn't know whether that was going to kill him or not. They
Sure.
were not sure. But it didn't matter because he was dying. Anyway, they injected him with phages. He didn't die. And about an hour and a half later, his vital, now this guy's like an hour or two from death, gets zapped with the phages. Now it isn't raw shit. It's also now sterilized, and the DNA has been altered to go after a certain type of virus. Okay, so it's a hybrid now, and it's not and it's not like sewer water.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, he gets injected. About an hour and a half later, all of a sudden, his vital signs start getting stronger. So let's give him another shot, and they give him another one, and then like an hour or two later, he gets stronger and stronger. Now he's still in a coma, but he's getting stronger. The next morning, Stephanie goes to the hospital to see him. He'd been in a coma for 8 months. She goes over to him and she speaks to him, and he opened his eyes and looked at her for about 10 seconds. And then he fell asleep. He didn't go into a coma. He fell asleep. And that was just that night before his treatment. And he was continued to be treated and over time. Now, this man really went through hell. And he came very, very close to dying. Because of that scientific experiment, it has changed the way medicine is treating certain diseases already.
Yeah.
And because of that, then scientists have been looking at different ways to use the same kinds of therapy or strategy. For example, finding a virus or something that could be altered and attack a cancer cell.
Interesting that this new type of therapy, or the reemergence of it, came from a person getting sick whose wife was an epidemiologist. I mean, those it's like the perfect confluence of factors. And then you throw in the connection that you had. It's it couldn't have happened had all those things not come together in the way that they did. Here's a question I always have had. What can the average person do to become more like you?
Please don't find another model. You'd be really sorry. but anyway, I have an answer to your question.
Okay.
So how can people be more psychic?
Yes.
Become aware of what's obvious. Being psychic, being intuitive is a natural instinct that most mammals have. Have you ever been sitting somewhere and just look up and all of a sudden you notice that someone's looking at you?
Absolutely.
Or have you been looking at somebody and they look up and they look at you? Have you ever had that experience? When you just were looking? Yeah, and you weren't like lusting around, you're just looking at them, and then that person looks at you. And that's the first part of being psychic. So we mammals have that intuition, that instinct. And it comes from our middle brain, called the mammal brain, as well as the brainstem, often called the reptilian brain. Mm-hmm. So it's in our instincts. It's not anything that we analyze, we just do. Or has there ever been a time you were thinking about somebody and then you bumped into them, or you got a call from them? Or have you ever been just about ready to step off the curb and for some reason you step back and a big truck zooms by?
Yeah, all those things have happened, of course.
Now that's what we all have, just like most of us have a body. And if we wanted to become a bodybuilder, we would take that natural body that we have and we would build it up, exercising and practice. And that's the same with being psychic.
So, I know that there are charlatans, and it really gives a bad name to people that do have these kinds of abilities. And, how do you, obviously you don't associate with those people, but how do you sort of deal with the fact that there are a number of people that are taking advantage of other people and creating careers?
Actually, I don't think there are that many charlatans or frauds. Oh, there are some, but the percentage is really small. So in this work, the easiest thing to do, to call somebody doing this, the easiest thing to do is say, oh, he's a charlatan or he's a fraud. Now, that's the easiest thing to do.
Yes.
Because there's no defense. The implication that the skill is bad, therefore, and is not a skill, and you're just using something to get money. People that do this work really believe they're giving service. They really believe they're helping people. Most do. What we get confused with is that not everybody plays in the NBA. Not everybody's an NHL star. What we're looking at is ability more so than morals. So it's more
Good
of
point.
a limited ability or an unevolved ability or an unexpanded ability. But it's not being a fraud. Not that often.
Yeah, I was always fascinated with the amazing Randy, who was a debunker of various types of cons based around psychic abilities for like Uri Geller, and there was another guy he spent his
he put $1 million up and said anybody that can pass this test wins the $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it two? Yeah, he did that.
It was interesting, though. I mean, there's a great documentary on him, and he really spent his whole life. I think he wanted to believe in something that he never was able to, possibly, or maybe he did. I don't know.
Now, Randy's not going to let anybody win his $2 million.
But I love that. But he was able to show in certain cases how these performers were pulling off their tricks.
The magician Doug Henning.
Yes.
Doug Henning was a Canadian. He was from Manitoba, Winnipeg.
Yes, I remember him.
In the 70s, and I was mentioned in another book written by that era, I met Doug. And we were involved in like the same kind of we were involved in a charity event. And I became friendly with Doug. And one of the things that I wanted to know was the amazing Kreskin really doing these psychic things, or was the amazing Kreskin a really good magician? Mm-hmm. I would respect both. So Doug Henning would not give me the answers, but what he did do is show me how to do some magic tricks. What I would do if somebody came to me and said, teach me how to be psychic, the first thing that I would do is take them down to the basics, become aware of what's obvious. Let me go one step farther. When we become aware of what's obvious, more becomes obvious to you. So when Doug showed me a couple of tricks, then I understood that concept. And then I did a whole bunch more. And I realized that, oh, this is something that can be duplicated over and over and over again. And so what I'm doing and what they're doing is the difference between professional wrestling and Olympic wrestling. In the professional wrestling, it's staged, but not fake, because right, and it's more flamboyant. Whereas Olympic wrestling is more subdued, a whole different game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I noticed the difference. So become aware of what's obvious. I'm answering questions from before because we're going to be wrapping up soon, I think.
Yes.
So become aware of what's obvious, and then more becomes obvious, and then more becomes obvious again. And eventually your awareness is so broad that what is obvious to you is not obvious to other people. So if you think of a painter, a guy that paints houses, and then think of a do-it-yourselfer painter. So the do-it-yourself painter goes to the store, paints his place. Everyone comes around and say, "Oh, Charlie, that's wow, this looks great." And what they're really saying is, "That's a nice color." Professional painter walks in and says, "Who did this crap?" And what the painter sees is, "Oh, that problem, that mistake, this," and it's because he is aware of what's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
To him. Now, when he shows the beginning painters or the do-it-yourselfer, see that line, you did that, and then we always will be aware of it.
Yeah.
And we go from there. That's how we become psychic.
Let's talk about, I know you're launching a new website, so by the time this gets edited and dropped onto iTunes, etc., your website will probably be up. So what is that going to be, and what's it called?
RobertLindseyMilne.com. And so we're sort of making that switch, as well as just be the way I'll be presenting myself. And I'm really excited about it.
And your email's on there also. And I'm assuming you can do readings for people on Zoom.
That's my job.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, good luck on that. So if you wanna have a psychic reading from Robert Lindsey Milne, you know where to find him now. It was really a delight to speak with you. Keep up the good work. Much appreciation for you listening to The Exploding Human. Thank you for your patronage. Enjoy doing the show. Please check out my website, theexplodinghuman.com, my YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. And if you would like to go to Patreon, patreon.com, Patreon, or through my website, you can click the donate button and it will take you to Patreon. There's extra content. If you want to become a supporter of the show, you will get to hear. So thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.